Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. As ever, I have an incredibly exciting guest for you tonight, Jane Lovas. Welcome, Jane.
Well, welcome, Jane.
Yeah, the two Janes. Yeah, cool. Okay, so Jane is a tech leadership expert, and she's committed to empowering 1 million women leaders in tech to see them sitting with other women in the boardroom or at the leadership table. So I can't wait to get into this discussion because, this is a topic that I'm really passionate about as well. Now, she's been in technology for decades, ever since software developers were called programmers, all that time ago, right? And while women are 50% of the population, they're only 22% of senior executives and board members. So something happens to women in tech, and we're going to get there in this interview. So we're going to get into the role of women in tech. We're going to look at leadership, culture, and how Jane is really at the forefront of female leadership and empowerment in the tech sector. So let's just get straight into it. So, Jane, first of all, you're based in Washington, right? Or near Washington?
Washington, D.C. In the
Washington,
U.S.,
D.C.
you have to be specific because there's two Washingtons, one on each coast.
Oh,
Because
okay.
there's Washington State and Washington, D.C.
Okay. And we were chatting beforehand, and you were saying that there's it's a bit of a tech hub, isn't it, Washington?
It is a small, we compared to the San Francisco area, it's a small area, but actually tech is spreading out even more since the pandemic. And part of the reason there's a fair amount of tech here is because the government's here, and the government, the US government has a big investment in technology. And there's a number of telecommunications companies and financial companies that are located here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the link between the US government and tech was brought to our attention recently with that infamous balloon from China, right?
Yes.
Which was very interesting development, wasn't it? That
Yeah.
kind of sort of strayed into US territory and was shot down. And what do you think about that?
Well, I have been so busy. I have not actually done a lot of reading except to see it. So on one hand, it doesn't surprise me. And on the other hand, it's like, here we go again.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting, isn't it? The US government. And I mean, we hardly dare talk about it really because it's all sort of pretty secretive really, isn't it? All that stuff that goes on at that level. But anyway, that's not what this podcast is about. We're going to talk about women in leadership in tech, and really what are the reasons why women are very underrepresented in tech businesses in general. What is the problem? Why is that happening? And what can we do about it? So, but before we get into that, Jane, just wanted to ask you, why are you so passionate about this topic?
Well, having been in technology since, like I said, when developers were called programmers, I have experienced this. I mean, there were times that I was the only woman in technology at the table and surrounded by men, and oftentimes leading a project or managing a team that was almost completely men.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I did not realize what a challenge it was. I lucked out and worked with some really powerful, great teams that were very committed to getting the job done, getting the work done. So they didn't care who their leader was. If they respected the leader and knew that the leader had their best interests in mind, they were happy. So I never felt like I couldn't lead. And then but I didn't know what I didn't know. That's the piece, is I didn't know what I didn't know. And it never occurred to me to really, like, what were my aspirations? I mean, at the time, my husband was on active duty in the Air Force. And so we were moving quite a bit. So I wasn't looking to stay at a company. And that's part of the reason that tech was so intriguing to me, because it was always an easy way to get a job. And we were in places where it would be easy to get, for me to get a job. So the moving around, I looked at that as exciting at the time. It never occurred to me that how would I expand my leadership roles. So I went from company to company, kind of at the same level.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started realizing that, wow, there are these other people that have gotten way up here. How did they do that?
Yeah.
And there were very few women up here.
Yeah.
That was the other thing. It's like, where are all the women?
Yep.
So so about a year ago, I created, as you said, I'm out to cause and elevate 1 million women leaders in technology. And about a year ago, I got really clear that if I didn't do something, nobody else was. And the great thing is that I found that there are more people doing things than I thought, supporting women in leadership, period. Because really, tech is a viewpoint of all women in leadership.
Yeah, that's true.
So I started sharing that vision. And the first time I shared it, I thought, oh, who am I to be doing this? Who am I to say this? And I'd stumble over it and go, well, I think maybe. And then I got clear. No, somebody's got to do it. So I'm going to be the one that starts the wave and enroll others and have conversations and share with others and provide, coaching. I do coaching and mentoring for women leaders in technology. And because there's things women can do to support themselves, but they can't do it themselves either. Then there's things that organizations and leaders, male leaders in organizations, also need to do.
And I think that's a really important point, because, as you said, I mean, there is this famous quote that I often refer to by the poet John Donne, which says, "No man is an island." Okay, they're talking about men, but at that particular time, women were they were not emancipated; they were just having babies all the time.
Right.
So obviously they would talk about men, but I mean, the whole idea of no man is an island is that we are interdependent on other people or with other people. And so as women in a male dominated environment, we are, we can't do it all ourselves. We do need men to kind of step over to our side and actually champion us and say, you know what, I believe in this person. I believe in her abilities. Obviously, I'm an entrepreneur now, so I'm not in that corporate environment, but I was for a long time, and I was usually the only woman in the boardroom. So I've been there too, and it can be a very painful and lonely experience. Very.
Absolutely. And that's why, there are actually, and the challenge and the shame is we have all these studies that prove how diversity in leadership in the boardroom actually expands and supports a company. It's not just a good idea. It's actually a financial and innovative and expansive support for a company. That when they have more diversity and when there's, and the other thing is that it has to be, it can't just be one or two. There needs to be, they've done studies that if there's 3 women in the room out of 10, then their voice is loud enough, is strong enough to be heard. Otherwise, it's that lone voice that's so hard to get heard. And I'm sure that's what you felt like a lot of times, right?
Well, I really did. I think what I felt when I was in that situation is I had never felt lonelier in my whole life, actually, because I had very young children at the time. I was a single parent. Well, actually, to begin with, I was in a very unsupportive relationship. So I, with a partner who was traveled abroad a lot. So I was with many, many peers who had a non-working wife at home, who was taking care of the children, and I would see what they did. I mean, I was working in media in London, and they would go out after work, and they would stay late at work, and I was saying, "Why are you staying late?" "Oh, I don't want to go home and bath the children, you know, all that boring stuff. I just like hang around here for a while." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." And, you know, then basically they had license to do whatever they wanted, whatever they wanted. And I'm like, "How do you get away with it?" Well, I just, you know, I didn't say that to them, but, you know, it's just assumed. And as a woman, I think you can never assume the, you know, that degree of support, really. Or certainly, let's just say British culture may be different in the US. I don't know.
Very, very similar. And I remember at one point my daughters were very young at the time, and I was offered a job with a consulting firm, with a large consulting firm. And I was in the final interview, you know, to be offered the job, and I found out I would be traveling 75 to 80% of the time with 3 little kids.
Yeah.
My husband at the time was active duty in the Air Force, an officer in the Air Force, traveling a fair amount, working long. It's like so the thing was, I was so sure that I couldn't do it. I'd never even talked to my husband about how could we, could we even do it?
Yeah.
We had no family around us or anything. So and yet I had a great sitter. I'm sure if she had found out, she would have said, "Oh, don't worry about it." But I just assumed, I can't do this. So I didn't take the job. And that was that's one of those like pivotal moments where it could have sent the trajectory of my career in a totally different way. So not that it's a problem, not that there's anything wrong. It's that I don't feel that I was really at choice to make a decision, that I really had the freedom to make a decision because of all the expectations.
Yeah, yeah. Cultural expectations. Yeah, yeah, I get that. Now, do you think, Jane, this whole thing about, you know, obviously what's happened since the pandemic, the rise of flexible working? I mean, I certainly know with my children and, you know, their peer group, because they're all in their, you know, early 20s, early to mid to late 20s, actually, mixture. But for most of them, they have adopted a hybrid working model that their employers support. So my daughter, for example, who works for a tech company, they're a San Francisco-based company, but they have a London office, and she works in marketing, and she can choose how often she goes in. And her boyfriend, who works for, well, it's actually Disney. But he goes in, I think, about 3 days a week, and I think most of their friends are, you know, now deploying this kind of hybrid model where they work in the office some of the time and they work from home the rest of the time. And I'm like, if only I had had that, when I had them, life would have been a dream.
Mhm.
So do you think the rise of flexible working, A, do you think it's here to stay? And B, do you think that has been positive for women in tech?
I think it's here to stay. I think it's one of those things we've my my thought is we've hit the tipping point that
Uh-huh.
there's I mean, you're seeing it. Companies say everybody's coming back and people go, I'm quitting. I'm not. So I think we're at that point that they have a really hard time justifying why you need to be in an office 40 hours a week. I think for a lot of companies it's important to have a team day because there's being in and being able to have a conversation because you just ran into somebody in the hallway. And you wouldn't, if you're working at home by yourself, you wouldn't be able to see them that quickly to just remember and, oh, they're going to be busy. I'm going to be busy. I'm not going to call them, all of that stuff. So I think there's definitely benefit to the hybrid. And if you live in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure this is the same in the UK, and I know it is in San Francisco, say not going into the office 2 days a week can save you 4 to 5 hours.
Oh yeah, more, a lot more if you're working, in London. I mean, it's normal for people to spend an hour and a half each way on a commute. This is in one day
Mm-hmm.
because the property prices are so expensive in and around the Zone 1 area that people will often live outside of London in the home counties,
Mm-hmm.
and they will, as I said, they'll travel in order to work. So, for me, for example, when I worked, I was doing 12-hour days because, I was probably at work for like maybe 8 or 9 hours, but the rest of it was commuting, 12
Right.
hours. So I would leave at 7:30, I'd get back at 7:30 in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
I am so glad I don't have to do that anymore. My god, that was a nightmare, it really was. And the interesting thing is that, I see in a generation how that's changed and how people what we used to tolerate, people do no longer find that acceptable really as a way of life, and I think that is obviously the blessing of being connected, of technology actually, that
Mhm.
is constantly innovating and making it possible for us to have conversations like this, as
Right.
well as obviously, work from home, get, work colleagues and people around the world to, have a sort of really good relationship with and collaborate with and all of that kind of thing. So it really, really has changed, and I think in many ways for the better.
Absolutely. Because as you said, we would not be connected if it were
Yeah,
not for this. I,
exactly.
I, yeah, I've had conversations with people in India, in Saigon, Australia, that I would never have had an opportunity to connect with.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, given all of that, do you think that we are going to see a lot more women in senior leadership positions in tech in the future?
I'm standing for it. I'm
Yeah.
I'm out to cause it. So I'm going to say yes because I don't want the work that I do to be in vain. And
Yes.
even if it is, the challenge is we were on an uphill trek
Mhm.
and the pandemic actually stopped it and took
Mhm.
us back
Uh-huh.
a number of years. And part of that was, you had all of a sudden within weeks, a couple months maybe at the most, a couple working from home, the schools shut down, daycares shut down. Who was now taking care of the kids? Yeah, flexibility to work at home is wonderful, But if you've got a couple kids under like 6 years old, they don't take care of themselves. You know, you read about people, oh, I've got a meeting, put the kid, you know, make sure that the child has some toys and things to play with and is sitting over on the side where they can kind of keep an eye on them and things. And how effective is that long term?
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, you know, if I was an employer, you know, and I had, you know, a woman who was at home and her children kept on popping up because, you know, she was supposed to be working and they wanted her attention, I would probably say that is not somebody that I want in my business. And I know that that sounds brutal and a little bit cruel, but unfortunately, just because we can work at home and just because, you know, there are issues around childcare and everything, it's it's always the question mark as to how flexible you can be, right? And obviously, I put on my hat as a woman and as a mother and all the rest of it. Then I put my hat on it as a managing director, as a founder, and somebody who, you know, needs to create profit within my business and actually
Mm-hmm.
protect the interests of my business. And I would struggle. I would struggle with that.
Yeah. And so, you know, so there's always there's some flexibility in how things can be done. But so I had a daughter and a son-in-law that were in that boat, both of
Yeah.
them working at home and their kids out of school.
Yeah.
Um, and fortunately, a lot of his work was on the East Coast. So a
Yeah.
good percentage of the clients he was calling and stuff were on the West Coast from um, from here on the East Coast of the US. So that's a 3 hour time difference.
Yeah.
So it gave him an opportunity so they could stagger a little bit.
Yeah.
So that was one of, you know, a way for them to deal with some of that.
Yeah.
And their kids weren't quite that little, but still, kids are kids when they're home. You can't expect them to take care of themselves all day. So that was one way they were able to solve that problem. But not everybody could.
No, and as you said, well, I mean, it's still happening over here. The schools are on strike. We're having a lot of strikes in this country at the moment.
Oh,
So the ambulance people are on strike. The schools are on strike. I mean, my children are older now, so I don't have to worry about that. But when the schools shut down, that there is, and you have to work, then it is a challenge, and obviously some people have the support, the resources, the family, and all the rest of
mm-hmm,
it to take care of that. But I must admit, it has been a challenge for me, and
mm-hmm.
that's the reason why I'm bringing it up, because I have had people work for me, and they show up on a call that we're supposed to have together to review their work, and they've got a baby in their arms and they've got 2 other toddlers that are screaming and "Mommy," and all of this kind of thing, and it's like, "I'm sorry, but I just cannot do this. I really can't do it." And then, you know, you feel a bit mean, but, you know, it's one of those things that, I think people, you know, women have to, and men as well, they do have to find that fine line, don't they,
Yep.
between the, you know, the professional behavior really and the, you know, the sort of tolerant society that we all want. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a fine line at times, isn't it?
And sometimes it's kind of a wavy line that it goes
Yeah.
back and forth because, you know, if you're talking with team members, it
Mm.
can be a little bit more casual. If
Yeah.
you're talking with a client,
Yeah.
you're representing your company too. So
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
situational, and And so it asks all of us to look at how do we solve that problem? Because if we don't solve it, we knock out a large percent of the population.
Well, that's right. And, when I think about it, when I was in that situation as a single parent, I had a nanny who was very, very flexible. There were things that I struggled with about her. She wasn't perfect by any means,
Mm-hmm.
but she would never, ever let me down because she had a whole family around her, and I knew her family, and her husband was lovely. She had 2 teenage daughters. Even if she wasn't feeling well, she knew what my job entailed, and she knew that she had to be that support for me no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So her family would step in even when she couldn't, and I know that I was very, very lucky there because I did not have family who could do that for me. Now, had I had a different type of nanny, and I remember, when my children were young, there was a celebrity actually that went to had children at the same school as my children, and her nanny used to drop them off, and her nanny's daughter was actually friends with my daughter, and she used to say, "I'm not feeling that well. I'm just not going to turn up." And I knew that this celebrity had a husband who was also a celebrity, the very big household names. And she used to say, "It's really not fair. She's screaming and shouting at me for this and that and the other." And it's like, well, look, I do understand it because, she is supposed to be live on this TV show, and you're telling her that your own daughter has tonsillitis, so you're not going to turn up. And it's just not an easy situation, is it? That whole childcare thing for
No.
women that have young children and they want to forge a career, particularly, as you said, in leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And as you were saying before, men have currently less responsibility and more freedom in that area of their life. So the expectation is that you can go out, you can go to dinners at the drop of a hat, you can go meet somebody. So networking, relationship building, ends up happening outside of work hours,
Yeah.
which then women miss some of that.
Yes. That's absolutely true. And, that was, again, that whole thing about the bonding outside of
Mm-hmm.
work and, the socializing and all of that kind of thing, is another thing that can hold women back because, if you were a guy, let's just say, and you were not clubbable, you were not sociable, certainly in the environment that I was in, which, okay, it wasn't strictly speaking tech, but there's a lot of parallels between media and tech. There's a lot of kind of
Mm-hmm.
crossovers and so on. And it was generally expected that you would invest in relationships, and particularly with me in a, business development, a client relationship management, and finally, managing director role. That was considered to be very important. So I think what we're really talking about is just a picture of women being very torn between, their desire to be, the homemaker and somebody who actually, makes it all happen and, oils the wheels really of their domestic situation,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is. And, somebody who also wants to show up as a serious professional and, build a lucrative career that ultimately also supports that family. And that's just where we are right now, isn't it?
It is. And the, you know, we need, we really need everyone to be able to contribute in whatever way works for them, which means being able to be the leader and be that fully, if that's what they choose.
Yeah.
And we need it not only for women, but we've got problems, we've got challenges in the world that we need solved.
Yeah.
And so we need everyone to be a part of the solution. And so by cutting out half of the population from solving the problems, we're missing solutions that we don't even know could come about.
True.
There's a company out in California called IDEO, and they're an ideation company. And they began to realize that by not having that diversity in their company and when they built teams to do problem solving or to test something that they had produced, they realized they were probably missing opportunities that they didn't even know about to solve problems by having such homogeneous teams.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't, it's not right to have one kind of dominant species, let's just say, rule the world. I mean, let's face it, there are obviously different, very, very, particularly I think here in the UK, we're a very ethnically diverse society, and there's really a lot of harmony, I would say, in amongst different, different kind of, I mean, not everywhere, but, different races and different, sort of nationalities and all of that kind of thing. We've got really used to that here in London. And that kind of diversity and the way that those different cultures are, I think, have made us a lot richer. And I think also the other thing that has happened is I think people are now much more aware and conscious of diversity in other areas like gender preference, your sexuality, and obviously also the kind of neurodiverse sort of things. So that the society is definitely kind of advancing, but we still have this situation where, look, it's great at a certain level. It's great in the trenches. You get everybody in the trenches and everybody gets on well with one another. But then you move up and you move up and it's like it starts thinning out. And then who's at the top? Well, it's just another bunch of men, white men, obviously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's, you can tell I love statistics.
Yeah.
So there's for the Fortune 1000 companies, there are more male leaders named James and Michael than there
Oh,
are women leaders.
really? Oh
Yes,
gosh. Oh,
yes.
really?
And what's the origin of the names James and Michael?
Well, they're WASP names, aren't they? They call them
Yes.
WASP in I mean, WASP isn't a phrase that we use over here, but it's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant really, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
So just gives you a hint that that's who's rising up to the top. And part of that is that as a species, we want to be with people that look like us. So
Yeah.
it takes something to look around your community and say, is my community diverse? Or is it a bunch of people that look very similar to me?
Yeah, and with very similar worldview as well, because I
Yes.
think, there's also we live in quite a classist society, let's just say, here in England. Obviously the class system, and in other parts of the world, like India, for example, with their caste system and so on, there's quite a kind of rigid hierarchy. And I think maybe less so, I'm imagining in the US, because I think the US is maybe a younger kind of society, but I may be wrong. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we don't have it the same way. It's really in the US, it's very much a money,
Yeah, yeah,
you're
money
so
talk.
so
Yeah.
so it's much easier to move up and down
Uh-huh.
because the class you're in is really based on the amount, more on the amount of
Yes.
money. And there is correlation to who your family background is, what schools you went to. There's enough correlation that we're not totally a classless society.
No, that's true, but there are some amazing, stories. In fact, I interviewed somebody last night for my podcast, a guy called Ryan Blair, and he had a terrible, terrible childhood, and he was actually an incarcerated gang member at the age of 16. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he was like a, drug dealer, a serious drug dealer and, terrible family background and raised in complete abject poverty. And he actually sold his business for 700 and I think $792 million. So he ascended basically to the total upper echelons
Yeah.
of society through that, through entrepreneurship, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking about that last night, and it's like, that is really amazing. And one of the things that we were talking about is how the US, because it is a society of entrepreneurs in a way, because everybody came to the US looking for a different life, a better
Right.
life. So therefore, what we discussed was that entrepreneurship is kind of in the DNA of many people that in the US. So, but we were saying that the US can be a lot more forgiving of people than, let's say, more traditional societies. I mean, you look at the royal family, for example, in the UK, that's all about tradition. It's centuries of tradition, centuries of history, and so on. And so change can be a little bit harder, I think, for, just really to come about.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think here we do look to the US to be the pioneers in these kind of areas. And I know the US isn't perfect, but we were talking beforehand about how you have so many amazing female role models. Not saying they're not here in the UK, but I think the US really is blazing a trail, particularly in the tech space, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of, women slowly kind of rising through the ranks and becoming influential and powerful.
Mm-hmm. And right. And we want to keep that going so that it
Mm.
can be that women rise as high as they want to, that
Yeah.
they stop when they're ready, not that because they hit the ceiling or they've got family obligations that overwhelm them, that they feel that they have no choice about,
Yep.
and that they have the choice to move up or not.
Yep.
And that's, and like I said earlier, there's things women can do and be responsible for. And then we've got things that organizations and those male senior leaders in organizations can do to support, to ensure that women, because it's not just an HR problem. Because if senior leadership in an organization does not care, HR can try and do all the things that they want to do, and it's not going to happen. And there's, like I said before, there's actual benefits. Companies are more successful. So by pulling women up, you get different, you increase your innovation, you increase, and this is a big one. These two are big ones right now, is increasing innovation. I mean, our innovation cycle has gone like from 5 years to 6 months. You've got to be able to think and move that fast in your company now. And they have companies with more women have higher levels of engagement.
Well, there you go. I mean, there's just we women, we love to communicate, don't we? We love
Yes.
to chat, we love to build relationships. I think naturally, if we're going to be stereotyped about it, I mean, obviously there are some differences conventionally between the sexes, and men tend to be very task orientated, and we women tend to be more relationship orientated. So, in a way, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Right. Right. And you need both of those.
You do. Of course you do. Absolutely.
And, one of the things, the way things get done in organizations, and this is where technology, I think, kind of pushes the envelope, because things get done in organizations with teams. That means a group of individuals that get together and have to work together.
Yeah.
Well, in technology, a lot of teams are still doing very individual work.
Yep.
And it's more like pass things on to different members of the team. So it's,
Yep.
I can do my work and I don't have to really be in relationship and in conversation with a lot of other people.
Yep.
Yet when we look at it, because I've been in this situation, when there is communication and relationship in the teams, things get done faster and better.
Yeah.
Because you're not having these conversations in your head. Should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? Which is the best way to do it? You have them in a group, and you have more variety.
Yeah. Different points of view, and
Yes.
because that, that's the thing. I mean, too much similarity in any kind of group is really, what happens is the dominant view kind of tends to prevail, doesn't it? The dominant
Yes.
values, the dominant view, and it's not always that's not healthy. I mean, we all know that, really, but sometimes it can be easy to forget that, or to overlook the importance of having those different influences. And as
Mm-hmm.
you said, having diverse different influences, it leads to a more innovative culture. Ultimately, a more innovative culture leads to competitive advantage, leads to winning, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, Jane, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you tonight and talk about one of my, my most favorite topics, which are, female empowerment, success. So I've really, of course, tech, which is something that I cover a lot on my podcast. So I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And, also you've got a book coming out, haven't you, Jane? So tell us about that.
Yes. The title of the book is Leading with Love. And
Nice.
one thing I want to be clear about is I'm talking about love as a power,
Aha.
not an emotion. Two totally different things. And
Mhm.
imagine a team, a leader that is more committed to the team's success than their own personal success.
Mhm.
And the paradox of that is they will be even more successful by being focused on their team's success than their own success.
Oh, yeah, nice. Lovely. Well, that sounds great, and that's on the way here, isn't it, Jane? So you were saying, like, the later part of 2023. That's going to be
Yes.
out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So really look forward to that. So, what's the best way for anybody who wants to contact you? Somebody who wants to maybe bring more women into the leadership positions in their business, or more women leaders who want a little bit of support, the right kind of support and coaching and
Mhm.
guidance to help them succeed. So where can they find you, Jane?
They can find me at lovasconsulting.com, and it's
Yeah.
LOV as in Victor, AS
Mhm.
consulting.com.
Yeah.
Connect with me on LinkedIn, and on both of those you'll see what I do and how I work with coaches, with how I coach with women leaders
Yeah.
and my commitment for causing 1 million women leaders in technology.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for a wonderful interview, and look forward to keeping in touch and
Oh,
getting the
yes,
interview out
Jane.
there. Okay.